You know, when it's so hot, it's really the pits when all of a sudden your container tomatoes are going, help, I'm not sure if I'm going to survive. And I'm having a little bit of that crisis going on in my home. Cindy Dole, Home Wizards. We're talking about landscape ideas here with a real pro who comes from, just a legacy of landscape architecture. David Snodgrass, the president of the National Landscaping Group Planet. So, David, we're going to get to some projects, but before we do, I wanted to first ask you, have you seen this, with all these family members of yours in landscaping, have you seen just a real change in trends? I mean, from people wanting the lush lawn and the white picket fence to now lose the lawn to saving water, and you name it.
It's a real big trend. People want to do the right thing when it comes to the environment, and one thing they can control is what happens around their home. And so yeah, there are some changes in opportunities for the landscape industry. The rainwater that hits the roof used to just flow away into the storm sewer. Well, now there's rainwater collection systems that can put it into a rain barrel, and then that water can be used in the garden. There's green roofs. It definitely provides a good protection from the sun and cooling, as well as all of this is giving off oxygen. People are very concerned about not using chemicals.
So there's a lot of ingenuity, isn't there? I mean, people are not giving up their gardens. We're just coming up with more creative solutions. You know? Yeah,
they're really good solutions that that just make sense.
Well, let's go to the phones because Rob is calling in from Mount Washington. Hey, Rob, it looks like you have a question about your shade garden. I have a lot of shade in our area. What's your question?
Yeah, Sandy, big fan of your show, and I'm managing the sunny part of my yard really well by watering the heck out of it, but I have a lot of shady stuff in my backyard, some areas that get either no sun or very little sun. And I just want to know what's an inexpensive and attractive thing that I can do to either grow things or what will grow there, or what should I do?
Well, for one, if the area is real shady, then lawn is gonna probably be out. You're gonna have a lot of difficulty trying to establish a lawn in deep shade. But one thing to keep in mind is different than the sun in that it needs a lot less water. So it's a different microclimate, and you need to pay attention to that differently. There are a lot of plants that will do really well in the shade, and like the hostas and
ferns,
the hydrangeas. There's a whole bunch of different plants that will do good there. So if you pay close attention to shade-loving plants, you should have pretty good success.
Do you have a favorite shade plant book or website that you refer to, David?
There are gardening books that will tell you, will list the plants that are shade plants. I know that the Oregon Extension Agency has such a book, and I think if you just went onto the web and you just called up shade plants, I think that you would get a good list just right doing that.
You know, the thing is, too, and of course, azaleas is a great idea for shade, or at least filtered light, although, as we learned just last weekend, we've got to be careful if we have a dog about the kind of plants that become toxic to dogs. So you can't just go out and get a plant. You got to do a little research.
Yeah, you do need to pay attention to that a little bit, but, you know, a dog would have to eat an awful lot of azalea leaves in order to cause a problem, and So although, you know, rhododendron leaves and azalea leaves, and I mean, there's several plants that if you ate enough of them, but that's the key. I mean, dogs don't have an appetite for azalea leaves.
Oh, that's good. Well, you're listening to Home Wizards. Maybe you have a landscape question. Call on in at 888-539-2980, 888-539-2980, talking with David Snodgrass, who comes from a family of landscapers for decades and decades. And so we just talked a bit about a solution for a shade garden. How about for a side garden? How about for that area where there really isn't a ton of space, but, you know, it's just that little nook or cranny where you get to it and you want it to look pretty?
You have to pay attention to the space that you're working with, and And if you'd like to set up some privacy, a hedge, there are some hedge plants that will grow in a very tight space and in like 2.5 or maybe 3 feet of space, and then with the rest of that space, figure out what you're going to need to do. If you need to move through the space, and then consider some kind of a walkway or stepping stones that will get you through. And it depends on if it's sunny or shady. Then you could make it a functional vegetable garden in a tight area if you had enough sun, or it could just be some highlight plants that just a mixture of different plants that give you some interest in that tight area.
I've also seen in fact, we have a little small side area, and people can turn this space into a great little shed planting area. It's part of your garden, but it can be a really attractive little planting bench, and with some extended seating, and it can be a place where you can share as you're maybe gathering some of your little containers for herbs and so forth, and you get a great little bench, and you paint it a colorful color, and then it kind of incorporates with the other plantings and looks just kind of unique to you. Don't you think that's important, just to make it an expression of your personality?
Absolutely. Your whole garden should be an extension of how you feel and what you like. The trend is yards used to be really big, and so it was a different type of a landscaping, but spaces have gotten very small, and so now when you're dealing with a tight side yard, well, you know what? There are great solutions, and that is the trend, is to be able to develop those small spaces, develop them well, and using dwarf plants that aren't going to be a lot of maintenance and won't take up a lot of space. You've got a lot of options, and also to make it functional, like what you say is if there's a shed or a place to hide tools or a functional space, that usually is a good place for it.
And always it's important to have a focal point, right? No matter what you're working with as a landscape designer or any kind of a designer, you want to have that one little spot where it's like, that's kind of like the star of the show, right?
Well, you definitely need to pay attention to your focal points and kind of work your landscaping into that point of interest. But you don't just have to have one. There's the concept of secret gardens and different spaces within your yard, so that maybe from one vantage point you can't see everything, so it kind of draws you out into the yard and moves you through the yard, and maybe you have an area that's a little bit more private with a bench and you can meditate or just relax there. Maybe you have a place that is for vegetable gardening. Maybe you have an area that's a little bit more formal with some roses. You don't have to have only one type of yard. You can have different venues throughout the yard, and it's really a neat effect.
It's very fun, and I love the idea of just kind of creating the path to forever. This almost a winding pathway that just kind of goes off into the distance, and you really can't tell. It's like this illusion. You can't tell that it stops. It just seems like it goes on and on.
I like that concept, and to expand on that, your landscape project should never stop either, because there's new plants, new introductions, plants that are blooming all year long, like you mentioned. There's plants that have different blooming seasons.
Well, tell us about some of those new plants, because I'm amazed. You were saying that there's some new hydrangeas that are going to be giving us flowers throughout the year? There's
hydrangeas that are ever blooming. They bloom on the new wood instead of the old wood, and so you get a lot longer season on the blooms. There's a Azalea line that was introduced, the Encore line, and they have blooms throughout the year. The old-fashioned ones had bloomed for maybe 3 weeks in the spring. Well, these now you get spring, summer a little bit lighter, fall another heavy bloom season, and so color in the landscape is so important, and it's a lot easier to get that.
But how do you pick your color palette? I mean, a lot of us, I know, I go into these garden centers, and it's like a candy store, or any kind of store like that, and you see so many vivid rainbows of colors, I just kind of stand there paralyzed and don't know what to pick.
I tell you what, I would just relax about the colors. Pick ones that you like. I mean, bright colors are wonderful. Have you ever known nature to really have colors that don't work together?
That's true.
They don't. They do work together, and contrast is really good. So pick your colors, your foliage, your texture. You know, maybe you have some grass texture against some larger leafy texture, and maybe you have a lacy maple leaves. And not only are you contrasting the color of the foliage, the blossoms when they bloom, you're also mixing in different textures of foliage. So it's an amazing canvas that you can be painting with.
And I love shades of green, too. If you really play with the really dark green to the lime greens and the variegated green leaves, and that, too, can almost become this interesting mosaic. You know, it really adds a lot of interest.
Yep, absolutely. And pay attention to the seasons. Like when you get into the fall, the oranges and the reds are if you go into the garden centers, you can see that whole palette of options in the garden center. And so you can actually bring in seasonal additions to your landscaping to match the season that you're going into.
Well, heck, you know, fall is, I can't believe it, September is coming up. September, October, I mean, they're already showing Halloween decorations, and we've been talking about Christmas in July. And so, well, give us some ideas to bring fall color to our yard.
Well, pansies that's the old standby because it's a cool season plant, and it's a great bloomer. And so after the heat kind of slows down a little bit, you get into September, October, then that's the pansy season. The beauty of pansies is that they bloom until you get a hard freeze, but it doesn't usually kill them unless it's really severe. And they come back and you have early spring color for another few months. And so you get a lot of bang for the buck when you plant pansies. Kale, flowering kale is a cabbage that comes in all kinds of different colors, and so that's a nice option. There's some camellias that bloom in the late fall and even in the winter. If you don't get much snow in LA or in California, but in Oregon, we'll get some snow, and these camellias are blooming when there's snow on the ground, and so there are a lot of different options.
All right. When we come back, we're going to do a quick little traffic check because people are out and about here in Southern California, David, and they want to know how to get to that home improvement store or wherever. But when we return, we're going to talk more with David about the other must-think-about items as you are getting ready to change and upgrade that landscaping and garden. It goes beyond the plan, but of course, how do you use the space? What about the budget? Do you do it yourself or do you hire it done? That's next. You're listening to Home Wizards, and I'm Cindy Dole, where we talk about the things that make you feel good at home. We're back in a minute.